Chapter 32. Why is he laughing again? Shuyi caught a glimpse of his expression inadvertently, and felt as if a layer of clothes had been taken off by his eyes, revealing all his thoughts. Shi Yan looked at her, raised his eyebrows slightly. Old friends, are you? Shuyi touched the tip of his nose guiltily, and admitted dryly, yes. Shi Yan nodded, and said in a very soft tone, I thought I was on a blind date. Really, what's the matter with him? Even this little trick can be seen. And Shuyi felt that he seemed a little angry. What kind of blind date? How could I have a blind date? You were just joking. Shuyi said again, do you think this is not the weekend? I just catch up with old friends. Shi Yan didn't answer, just stared at her. It seemed to be waiting for her to tell the truth. After a while, the person opposite only moved his eyeballs, but did not move his mouth. Reminiscing about the past, Shi Yan said casually, with a cold tone, then you are quite free. The moment he said this, Shuyi was really angry. If someone else said it, she just turned her head and ignored him. But it was Shi Yan who said this. Who is Shi Yan? A man who can never speak normally. You have to turn his words around. So after thinking about it, the smell of gunpowder became sour in Shuyi's heart. He just wasn't happy. Just jealous. Thinking of this, Shuyi raised his head, wanted to laugh, but had to hold back, so he could only follow his words. It's quite free, and I don't have anyone to accompany me. She looked at Shi Yan, and the tiny and flickering lights flickered in her eyes, as if she was talking. Shuyi really wanted to convey her meaning through her eyes. But at this moment, her cell phone rang suddenly, breaking the atmosphere of this moment. The bell rang for a while. Shi Yan lowered his eyes, looked at the phone Shuyi was holding in his hand, turned his face away, and uttered a word abruptly. Catch, the phone call was actually from a beauty salon where Shuyi applied for a card. Ms. Shuyi, good evening. We are here at Mankarina Beauty Center. Now we have an anniversary reward event. In order to give back to our old customers, we have specially launched a free trial event for members of Tongyan Water Condensation to experience the latest mesotherapy. Shuyi said twice, and then asked again, I wonder if you have time to come and experience it tomorrow. Tomorrow. Shuyi raised his eyes and looked at Shi Yan until his eyes turned around, and then said, I don't have anything to do tomorrow, I'm free anyway, I should be free. Yeah, okay, let me make an appointment for you first. After hanging up the phone, Shuyi scratched his forehead, and was about to speak when Shi Yan suddenly said, Mingyu Yunchuang's IPO deep digging is done. Shuyi, Shi Yan, since I'm so free, come to Yunchuang to work overtime tomorrow. Shuyi, no, I'm trying to imply that you're dating me, but you're telling me to work overtime. It wasn't until she went home and changed her clothes that Shuyi reluctantly accepted the fact that she really had to work overtime tomorrow. If you work overtime, you can work overtime. Maybe it's the kind of scene where red sleeves add fragrance. Shi Yan was reading and doing things there, and she was helping to make a cup of coffee, talking and flirting. Just as she was thinking, Shuyi's mother called. How did the chat go today? How do you feel about Yu? Shuyi was silent for a while, and then pulled himself out of Shi Yan's coquettish operation. It's okay. Okay, Mom was not happy. It's not unreasonable for Mom to teach you to be content and happy. I know girls at your age will always imagine those celebrities as their husbands. You can't look down on the boys around you, and missed a lot of marriages for nothing. Mom, I just said it's okay. Shuyi turned on the speakerphone expressionlessly and walked towards the dressing table. I didn't say he was bad, what are you in a hurry for? Mom is not in a hurry. Mom is talking to you. I'm afraid you will have some illusory thoughts. Then I never imagined that Andy Lau is my husband. Then you can't do it, it's called incest. Shuyi, I'm going to take a shower, there's nothing to hang up beforehand. Wait, Mom stopped her from hanging up the phone. I just communicated with our principal, and you also said that he could get to know you better, so let me see, you guys will meet again next week. Don't just eat, go watch a movie or something. Let's talk, I'm going to take off my makeup. After hanging up the phone, Shuyi looked at herself in the mirror, and suddenly felt that today's light makeup was so plain, no wonder Shi Yan only asked her to work overtime. So the next day, Shuyi deliberately got up early and dressed up carefully. It's just that when choosing clothes, I was thinking that it's not good to dress too much for work, and at the same time, I was thinking that Shi Yan likes red. After struggling for a long time, she still had a faint hope Shi Yan couldn't really ask her to go to work, he just wanted to stay with her. Thinking of this, Shuyi put on a red skirt under his overcoat with peace of mind, and stepped on stiletto heels. But when he arrived at Mingyu Yunchuang's office building, Shuyi had a vague sense of foreboding. For this kind of financial technology company, she knew that overtime was serious, but she didn't expect that it would be so serious. The reception hall on the first floor is crowded with people, and the employees wearing badges are hurrying, holding documents in their hands, occasionally dropping a stack, squatting down to pick it up, and rushing into the elevator. Seeing this scene, Shuyi almost thought that she had misremembered the date. It was not the weekend, it was Wednesday. For a moment, she began to regret that she was dressed up today. But everyone is here, so what can we do? Do you have to go back and change your clothes? So Shuyi didn't care about the occasional gazes cast by someone, and strode towards the elevator room with big strides. While waiting for the elevator, she sent Shi Yan a message. Shuyi, I'm here. Shi Yan, yes. Shuyi, oh, I didn't expect that I would come to work overtime with you on the big weekend. Shi Yan's reply was simple and clear. Shi Yan still wronged you. Shi Yan, first go to the 8th floor to find Mr. Chiu to get the materials, and then come to the 12th floor. Really treat me as an errand. Don't you have a secretary yourself? Although Shuyi groaned and groaned, he obediently got into the elevator. After climbing for a few seconds, the elevator stopped on the 2nd floor. Shuyi was looking down at his mobile phone when the door in front of him opened slowly, and a somewhat familiar voice came faintly. Okay, I'll tell Mr. Chiu later, don't worry, I'll remember it, and I won't forget it. First, go to the personnel department to say hello. Qin Leji was standing at the elevator entrance, with a man behind him flatteringly seeing him off all the way. Until Qin Leji turned his head and saw Shuyi in the elevator, he was stunned for a moment. The man just glanced at Shuyi without thinking about it, and after thanking Qin Leji repeatedly, he turned and left. As soon as Shuyi and Qin Leji's eyes met, the surrounding space seemed to be filled with something, and they were so crowded that they stood in the narrow elevator without moving. Qin Leji looked at Shuyi's attire calmly, and then glanced at the floor she pressed. On the 8th floor, the office of the chief financial officer. At that moment, a certain idea in Qin Leji's heart was confirmed. It has been a week since she was scolded by Qiu Fu last time, but she didn't swallow it. It wasn't because her performance this month was deducted, she was simply not convinced that she was being scolded because of Shuyi. From that day on, she wondered why Qiu Fu protected her so much. Even half an hour after get off work, he hurried back to see her again. It takes 3 hours to chat in the office. Qin Leji is not new to society, she is 2 years older than Shuyi. After graduating and working for 5 years, she has been groping in the high-level circle. She has seen too much right and wrong, and the current situation, in her eyes, is nothing more than normal. Thinking of this, Qin Leji withdrew his gaze and just stared at the elevator door. Originally, Qin Leji hadn't thought about anything else, but he saw the two figures reflected on the smooth mirror. Shuyi stood there, not knowing what he was thinking, with a calm expression. But the most superficial sense of crisis still swept Qin Leji slowly. Among the money relationships she has seen over the years, the people who have benefited the least, regardless of gender, have exchanged their short youth for wealth that ordinary people can't expect in a lifetime. However, the ones who are really profitable are the ones who have obtained network resources, and their status follow one after another, but the money benefits come second. Qin Leji couldn't imagine what Yu Xingzhou would think if Shuyi really relied on Qiu Fui to fly to the branch, and whether her position in this relationship would be threatened. And once people become rivals in love, other aspects will naturally become hostile. Even if she didn't consider Yu Xingzhou, she didn't want Shuyi to really stand in front of her one day. Therefore, when the elevator stopped at the personnel office on the 7th floor, Qin Leji was not in a hurry to get out. She took a step forward, stepped on the edge of the elevator, and turned her head. Miss Xing, although I don't know what's going on when you come to our company on the big weekend, I want to remind you. Shuyi raised his head and raised his eyebrows. Qin Leji, President Qiu's wife, is the vice president of a self-media operation company. If something shameful happens to her marriage, with her ability, it's just a matter of saying that she wants to make a big fuss. Shuyi was stunned for 3 seconds before realizing what she meant. It's not that she reacts slowly, but that she really can't match the person who said this with Qin Leji. Immediately, Shuyi laughed until his facial features were distorted. If it wasn't for the consideration that this is a public place, she would even want to roll on the ground. Are you reminding me? Shuyi curled his index finger and wiped the corners of his eyes. Why, have you washed your hands? Qin Leji. The 4 words golden basin washing hands are too lethal, and they directly poked Qin Li's spine. And now that he was in the company again, Qin Leji was really afraid that Shuyi would say some rumors, so he stopped his legs, turned around and left with a sullen face. The comedy effect brought by Qin Leji lasted only 5 minutes after Shuyi walked into Qiu Fu's office. Because she saw that the materials Qiu Fu had prepared for her were half a meter tall. Seeing her staring blankly, Qiu Fu smiled and said, "These are all public materials that you can refer to. If they are not enough, I will ask someone to prepare them for you later." Shuyi made a dry laugh. Enough. She thought that Shi Yan was going to have an office date with her, but she didn't expect that man really asked her to work overtime. Carrying a large stack of documents to the 12th floor, Shuyi ignored other people's eyes and walked directly into Shi Yan's office. Her hands were sore, but the man was sitting behind the desk leisurely holding a cup of coffee. Seeing her coming, he just pointed to the sofa beside him, meaning let her go to work there. Shuyi put the things on the table in front of the sofa, flipped through them casually, and almost fainted. Just the financial statements for the past 3 years is enough for her to drink a pot. It's not necessary to have such a big family business. Probably because this pile of information had too much impact on Shuyi, she felt that she really had to explain it this weekend, so she buried her head in it. Except for the occasional keyboard sound, the office is so quiet that even the whistle outside the window can be clearly heard. When Shi Yan sat behind the table, the sunlight from the sky happened to refract across the table, casting a geometric shape on the ground. He looked for the light and shadow, and glanced at the sofa. Shuyi immersed himself in the mountains of materials, tapped the keyboard from time to time, sometimes picked up a pen to write and draw, his brows furrowed and relaxed, and occasionally he muttered a few words. 3 hours flew by like this. The silence in the office was suddenly broken by the doorbell, followed by the sound of high heels stepping in. Shuyi frowned, subconsciously thinking that it was Qin Leji who came in, but when she looked up, she found that it was a strange middle-aged woman. The woman put a stack of materials on the Shi Yan table, whispered a few words to him, and walked out without looking away. It was almost 12 o'clock at noon. After such an interruption, Shuyi could no longer concentrate, and Qin Leji's face appeared in his mind again. "I didn't think about it just now, but now I feel that even Qin Leji has to work overtime." Thinking of this, she couldn't help but cast a few glances at Shi Yan. When he was thinking about how to speak, Shi Yan suddenly asked, "Hungry?" Shuyi. No. She touched her face and felt that her face was quite normal today. Shi Yan, then you keep looking at me. Shuyi. Originally, Shuyi didn't think of anything else, but after being told this, she really stared at Shi Yan blatantly. The 4 words beautiful and delicious are worthy of him. "Look what's wrong with you," Shuyi muttered. "How do you know I'm watching you if you don't look at me?" Shuyi was used to making teasing on purpose, but this time, Shi Yan did not deny it. He just looked at Shuyi like that, his eyes behind the lenses were light amber in the sunlight. His gaze was direct, coming through the light and shadow, making the surrounding air thin. Shuyi suddenly felt unsteady breathing. She looked away, picked up the tip of the pen to scratch her hair, and said abruptly, "Last time I heard you say that you have a niece." Shi Yan withdrew his gaze, raised his hand to loosen his tie, let out a and then turned off the computer. Shuyi tried to put on a casual tone, "Then your niece should be very happy, she eats and drinks every day and doesn't have to work, right?" "Who said she doesn't have to work?" Shi Yan walked towards this side, his footsteps were light. "Oh, is Miss Tianjin going to work too? I thought she would be the boss directly." "She doesn't have that ability, and it's already a luxury to do a good job at the grassroots level." "Oh, that's how it is." Shuyi seemed to understand. "Then you are really good at teaching." But when she turned her head, Shi Yan sat beside her at some point. His tie was half loose, and a button on his chest was undone, and he just leaned on the sofa casually. The hems of their clothes touched each other, and Shuyi made a sound when he moved. When Shuyi was stunned, Shi Yan raised his hand to take off his glasses, and turned his head to look over. Without the cover of the frame, those eyes are even more profound. Shuyi once heard that men with deep brows and eyes are naturally affectionate. So much so that at this moment when Shi and Shi Yan are looking at each other, looking into his eyes, there will be an inexplicable feeling in her heart. Anxiety based on a mixture of guilt and shame. What are you hiding from? Shi Yan pinched her chin, don't let me look back. Oh. The warmth of his fingertips came from his chin, spreading from that small spot to his entire face. The two were so close that even their breaths were intertwined. Shuyi's voice became smaller and smaller. I'm afraid you'll be addicted to my beauty and you won't be able to extricate yourself. I'm obsessed. What are you afraid of? Afraid that I will eat you. Chapter 33. The moment Shi Yan's voice fell, Shuyi was stunned for a moment. However, Shi Yan's face was so close at hand, her breath lingered around her. Something indescribable filled the spacious office to its brim. Slowly, the images in Shuyi's mind began to disappear in an indescribable direction. None of the 8 horses could hold them back. The changes in mental activity also showed on the face uncontrollably. The concrete manifestation is that Shuyi blushed to the point of burning hot. Naturally, she could also feel the burning sensation brought by her skin, and even her breath became a heat wave. But she subconsciously felt that she shouldn't panic at this time. After staring at Shi Yan for a while, Shuyi finally blinked his eyes and spit out each word. Wow, time banquet. Shuyi, I'm looking forward to it. Time banquet. Obviously his face was already red like a red Fuji apple, but he forced himself to say such words to support the scene. I don't know what the picture is. Shi Yan suddenly felt a little funny. He moved his fingertips and squeezed Shuyi's chin. Are you still ashamed? Shuyi. Shi Yan let go, sat up straight slowly, and put on his glasses. Shuyi touched his chin, which still felt a little itchy, and muttered softly, you didn't say that first. Shi Yan straightened his arms, leaned on the sofa, and looked at her with his head half tilted. Do you listen to everything I say? Listen. Shuyi continued, I won't listen to what you say. Didn't you tell me to work overtime? The people next to him approached again, but not as close as before. As if his breath was intertwined, he leaned over, and his arms just wrapped around Shuyi's back. Then I'm really hungry now. Shuyi. She opened her eyes wide, looked around, and stammered, it's broad daylight, this is the office, isn't it good? What's wrong? Food and sex, and sex. Shi Yan moved a little closer, who stipulated that during the day, you can't be in the office. Shuyi's fingers gripped the sofa instantly, if you say that, then I have to go to the bathroom urgently. Bathroom, Shi Yan squinted his eyes, do you have this habit? Shuyi's mind buzzed for a while, and heaven and man began to fight. One step in place, isn't it too fast? But looking at Shi Yan's complexion, she seemed to be doing nothing wrong, but this scene was really exciting. It turns out that the office poly written in the novel is not fabricated, and it's a good one in the CEO's circle. Seeing that Shuyi's eyes were fixed in midair, he really started to diverge his thoughts. Shi Yan finally vented his intention to tease her, put the back of his hand against the corner of his half-curved lips, got up, and walked towards his desk. Pack up the things in front of you and eat. Shuyi, what? Shi Yan leaned against the table, looking condescendingly at Shuyi, who was sitting. Your company doesn't allow eating in the office during the day. Shuyi. After being stunned for a while, she laughed dryly, and with a little annoyance, she pushed away the documents in front of her. Our company's system is relatively strict, and it's really not allowed to eat at the workstation. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. Someone brought in 2 square lunch boxes and neatly placed them on the reception table. Shuyi looked at the dishes that were laid out one by one, her eyebrows and eyes drooped. Overtime, materials, working meals. What a fulfilling day. There was still a lot of information on the table. Shuyi estimated that the workload was not small, so he took a few more bites. He didn't feel it when he was sitting and eating, but when he stood up after the meal and went to the bathroom in his office to rinse his mouth, Shuyi felt his stomach full. When he came out, he was thinking about how to digest it, but Shi Yan got up and said, I'm going to the meeting, you stay by yourself. After he finished speaking, he went straight to the office door. Just as he was about to step out, he suddenly thought of something, looked back at Shuyi, who was pacing slowly, and said, Are you used to eating small cakes after meals? Shuyi, Shi Yan, if you want to eat. Shuyi reacted, and said blankly, Don't eat. Shi Yan smiled and didn't say anything. After walking out, the door of the office closed automatically, and Shuyi was still looking at the door, and after a long while, he slowly looked away, relaxed all over, sat down on the sofa, and took out his mobile phone to send a message to Bai Ruishan. Shuyi, I think things are going differently now than I imagined. Bai Ruishan, what's wrong? Shuyi, I seem to have deviated from the track of my little aunt, and I am running towards the direction of my girlfriend. Bai Ruishan sent a voice message and said in surprise, you guys went to bed so soon. Shuyi, what do you think? Shuyi, but I think she typed intermittently, without any logic or organized language, and talked about what happened in the office today in a mess. I don't know if Bai Ruishan can understand it. It is estimated that Bai Ruishan is also busy with work at the moment, so she didn't reply for a while. Shuyi waited for a while, and felt sleepy after the meal, so she grabbed a pillow and leaned against the sofa, intending to take a nap for a while. The heating in the office was fully turned on, and after a while, Shuyi fell asleep. It was only 2 o'clock, and the sun was slowly covered by clouds. The shadow cast by the curtains just swayed on Shuy's face, bringing a bit of coolness. Unknowingly, time passed quietly in sleep. When Shi Yan came out of the conference room, Fu followed behind Shi Yan with 2 middle-level managers, holding a folder, and prepared to go to his office for a small meeting. As soon as the door was opened, a woman was half leaning on the sofa, sleeping soundly. The reason why they saw this scene at a glance was because the woman was wearing a red dress, which was too eye-catching in this cold-toned office. What's even more eye-catching is that her legs are casually folded and hanging beside the sofa, revealing a section of slender calf and the instep not covered by the high heels. The atmosphere at the door of the office was momentarily indescribable. After thinking for a moment, Fu immediately turned his face away with the attitude of "do not see evil." The other 2 middle managers also turned around 90 degrees. As soon as he turned around, he found 2 middle-aged men facing each other, and immediately turned 180 degrees to look at the scenery of the company. Shi Yan glanced at them and seemed to despise their panic. Hold on, then he walked in calmly and closed the door. Fu, don't worry about what door you close. Shi Yan came in with light steps, stepped on the carpet beside the sofa, and looked down at Shuyi. She was half tilted, holding her head at a strange angle. I didn't feel it when I just fell asleep, but if I woke up, even if my neck was broken, my waist would be stiff for a long time. Shi Yan squatted down, put his arms around her back and the bends of her legs, and with a slight push, she lay down on the sofa safely. After all, Shuyi was disturbed by the small gesture. She frowned, didn't open her eyes, twisted her neck, and found a more comfortable position to continue sleeping. But after a few minutes, she gradually realized that she seemed to have been touched. The moment I opened my eyes, there was nothing in front of me, and the leaves of the green plants shook slightly. Shuyi was a little dazed, sat up slowly, looked around, and finally confirmed that he was hallucinating. The consciousness was still a little slack. Shuyi glanced at the phone screen. It was exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and she fell asleep for more than an hour without paying attention. There are still several unread voice messages from Bai Ruishan in the phone. After a nap, people are more tired. Shuyi even slowed down her breathing, leaned lazily on the sofa, and clicked on these voices. Bai Ruishan's voice was particularly clear and loud in this quiet office. Bai Ruishan, actually, I've wanted to say it a long time ago. Bai Ruishan, I think, even if you don't take pictures of that, if you just take pictures of this person, you won't lose. Bai Ruishan, not only is it not a loss, it's a huge profit, okay? Bai Ruishan, come on, sister, I sincerely hope that you will marry into a wealthy family and become rich. It wasn't until the last voice was played halfway through that Shuyi finally remembered that he was in Shi Yan's office. Even if other people were not around, it would be weird to release this, so he quickly cut off the voice. At the same time, there was a sound of gurgling water in the office. Shuyi's heart suddenly rose to his throat, and he looked towards the bathroom next to him almost reflexively, while holding his breath. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. After a while, the sound of water stopped, and the door was opened from the inside. Shi Yan came out holding a tissue and wiping his hands. Sure enough, it was him. Shuyi's heart sank heavily when he mentioned his throat, and he couldn't even speak. Just watching Shi Yan wiped his hands, walked behind the desk, threw away the tissue, and then looked at her. Wake up. Shuyi was stunned for a moment, then nodded. Why are you here? Shi Yan looked amused. Is this my office or yours? Shuyi's words got stuck in his throat, and he couldn't utter a single word. After a while, she murmured, you just wash your hands. Shi Yan asked, what's wrong? Seeing that his expression was very normal, Shuyi slowly regained his composure. The bathroom door was closed, so he shouldn't have heard anything. Nothing, just startled. Oh. Shi Yan walked over and looked straight at her. Why didn't I realize you were so timid before? Shuyi pursed her lips, not knowing what to say for a moment. Until Shi Yan pointed to the information on the table, treating my office as a hotel, why not do business? Oh. Shuyi immediately issued a financial statement. When Shi Yan walked out of the office, she breathed a sigh of relief and took out her mobile phone to find Shan. Shuyi, scared me to death. Shuyi, Shi Yan almost overheard what you just said. The office door opened, and after Shi Yan walked out, it closed again automatically. Without stopping, he walked straight ahead and said a word coldly. Go to meeting room 3. Qiu Fu glanced at him in confusion, and the two subordinates behind him also looked at each other. After only a few minutes, why did this person's mood take a big turn? Thinking of the upcoming separate meeting, several people became nervous. Shi Yan had a small meeting for 2 hours, and when they returned to the office, the materials on the table were neatly arranged, and it was obvious that they had already gone through it. And Shuyi was standing by the window, answering the phone. Saturday, it should be okay. There is no overtime at the end of the year. It's okay to travel around for 2 days, but I have to wear a computer, maybe there will be a sudden job. The person on the other end of the phone was a girl that Shuyi knew when she was an intern at a newspaper office. The two have had a good relationship since then. Although they each work in different companies now, their contact has never been broken. She originally planned to go out with her boyfriend to play around, but he suddenly had something to do with her. But she had already booked the hotel and bought tickets online, so she didn't want to just miss it, so she called Shuyi and asked if she wanted to go with her play together. Shuyi listened to her talking for a while, nodded and said, I will go to the company for a regular meeting tomorrow to confirm if there is anything important, and then I will reply to you. Just after finishing speaking, Shi Yan's voice suddenly sounded behind him. Busy, Shuyi. She turned her head quickly and saw Shi Yan standing not far from her. With a trace of panic, Shuyi said to the other end of the phone, I have something to do now, so hang up first. Then he asked Shi Yan, what? When Shi Yan passed by her side, he glanced at the cell phone she was holding tightly and said, next Friday to Sunday, Fuqing will hold the Crunch Summit Forum, won't you go? The Cruncher Summit Forum originated in the West. It is an annual grand event in the industry where industry leaders gather, and Shuyi certainly wants to go. It's just that this year only TV reporters are eligible for membership. Shuyi said truthfully, I am not qualified to enter. Shi Yan, then you have it now. Shuyi. Seeing her ignorant look, Shi Yan approached her step by step and forced himself in front of her. You don't want to go. Want to travel around with your old friend. Not me. Are you going? Shi Yan stared at her closely, trying to catch some emotion from her eyes. Hasn't even the Cruncher Forum appealing to you? Shuyi thought about it seriously, and then, expectations and joy burst out in his eyes. Of course, the Cruncher Forum has a certain attraction for her, but the greater attraction is. Then am I following you all the way? Shi Yan didn't answer immediately, but looked at Shuyi carefully, with a trace of inquiry. Seeing Shuyi frightened for a while. After a long time, he narrowed his eyes, sighed, and then said, well, the whole process, including board and lodging, what do you think? Chapter 34. Thursday afternoon. Shan decided to go. Shuyi, go, Cruncher Forum, would you go instead? Shan, of course I will. Shan, but are you really going to a meeting or a date? Shuyi, grin. In fact, Shuyi decided to go to the Cruncher Forum on the night when Shi Yan proposed it. It was only today that he had time to talk to Shan. As for eating and living together, Shuyi knew that it was nothing more than Shi Yan's teasing her. Shuyi didn't really think what he was going to do, it was the Cruncher Forum. After talking to Shan, Shuyi cleaned up the table and went to Tang Yi's office to say hello. The Cruncher Forum. Tang Yi was so shocked that he couldn't hold the pen steady. Are you going? How are you going? We don't have any quota this year. Shuyi touched his nose and whispered, Shi Yan will take me there. Shi Yan, the pen in Tang Yi's hand dropped off the table, he took you there. Shuyi nodded, yes, that's what you heard. Tang Yi looked at Shuyi from head to toe, and then from foot to head, which made Shuyi feel nervous. Then, you go. Tang Yi waved to her, but when Shuyi turned around, she stopped her again, wait, why did Shi Yan take you there? What's your relationship with him? Shuyi turned around and saw that Tang Yi's index fingers were aligned. Is that kind of relationship? This action is quite cute. Shuyi burst out laughing. If you want to ask carefully, what little action? Tang Yi withdrew his hand and said seriously, so. Shuyi sighed, pursed his lips, and shook his head slightly. She wanted to say not yet, but before she opened her mouth, Tang Yi said, it's against me, just say how is it possible.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to our channel for more captivating illustrated romance audiobooks. Don't miss out on our latest releases and be part of our growing community. Hit that subscribe button and embark on an enchanting journey with us.
Shuyi. Tang Yi waved his hand. Okay, then you go. Remember to go to OA to approve the leave. With half an hour left before get off work, Shuyi turned off the computer, packed up his things and prepared to go home. Where are you going? Kong Nan glanced at the time. Is there a mission? When Kong Nan asked, Qin Shiriwa also looked up, and a eagerness to leave work early emerged from her eyes. You can't leave early. Shuyi pointed to her forehead, and then turned to talk to Kong Nan. I have something to do, so I asked for a day off. Kong Nan asked, casually, what's the matter? The cubicles in the office area are next to each other. Shuyi didn't want to publicize this, so he said casually, my dad is on vacation, come and see me, and I will play with her for a few days. Originally, the past few days were not very busy, so Kong Nan didn't think much about it. Shuyi took a taxi home before the rush hour, had a simple dinner, and then packed the luggage for the trip. Since it wasn't long, Shuyi turned a small 20-inch box out, packed 2 changes of clothes and daily necessities, and sent a message to Shi Yan. Shuyi, I'm ready. Shuyi, when are we going to leave? Shi Yan, go downstairs, the driver will pick you up. Shuyi immediately pulled the suitcase and went out. Before he walked out of the community, he saw the shining Rolls-Royce parked on the side of the road. The suitcase made a grunting sound on the stone road. Shuyi walked out of the gate of the community, and was about to cross the road when she suddenly heard someone calling her. Calligraphy. The voice sounded strange at first, but after careful identification, it felt very familiar. Shuyi turned around. The security booth turned on the searchlight. Yu Xingzhou stood in the dark light. His hair was yellowish by the light, and a few strands hung on his forehead. It looks a little downcast. Shuyi only took one look, and was about to step forward. Yu Xingzhou immediately ran 2 steps forward and grabbed her. What? Shuyi wanted to shake off his hand, but the difference in strength was too great, it was useless. Yu Xingzhou clenched his hands tighter and tighter. I have been waiting here for you, and I want to tell you something, but I don't want to listen to you. Shuyi glanced at the opposite car and said impatiently, let me go, I have something to do. Give me a few minutes, Shuyi. His voice trembled a little, and the hand holding Shuyi became hot, and his eyes were full of persistence. You. Shuyi stopped struggling. It's not that I'm soft-hearted, I just don't want to make too much trouble on the street. Okay, I'll give you 2 minutes, talk quickly if you have something to say. As usual, Shuyi got straight to the point, but Yu Xingzhou showed a look of hesitation. It wasn't until Shuyi lifted it up in one breath and was about to leave again that he hurriedly said, have you got a boyfriend? Shuyi suddenly stopped and looked at Yu Xingzhou puzzled. What's the matter with you? Yu Xingzhou frowned into the word chuan, as if the next words were very difficult to say. You can make a new boyfriend, I'm not qualified to control it, but, are you dating a married man? AI couldn't say a complete sentence every now and then, as if he was heartbroken. Are you crazy? Shuyi laughed angrily at his sage-like appearance. I thought I had the same hobbies as yours. Sorry, that disappointed you all. She thought it was funny that Qin Leji and Yu Xingzhou were both bitches. Instead, she erected a towering archway to educate her. Do you think your face doesn't hurt enough? Yu Xingzhou froze in a daze, not knowing how to answer the question for a moment. Last night, Qin Leji faintly revealed to him that Shuyi seemed to be very close to the chief financial officer of their company, and he talked about some details sporadically. From Yu Xingzhou's point of view, he felt that Qin Leji didn't need to slander Shuyi. But in the end, he had doubts, so today he secretly came here to wait for Shuyi behind Qin Leji's back. Yu Xingzhou, do you think you're kind? Shuyi tightly held the handle of the suitcase to prevent himself from slapping it, and from time to time, he had to watch the movement of Shi Yan's car. Admonish me, you wash yourself first. Get out of the way. People are waiting for me. I have no time to chat with you here. Because Shuyi frequently looked over there, Yu Xingzhou naturally discovered the existence of that car. How could he not recognize that sign, that license plate? Seeing him staring at the car, Shuyi couldn't help but roll his eyes. What are you looking at? Have you never seen a luxury car? Yu Xingzhou looked back and forth between Shuyi and the car on the opposite side, and said hesitantly, he's not, you. Yes, that's my serious prospective boyfriend. Shuyi shook his head. What, you have to take care of this. Yu Xingzhou was so shocked that he couldn't speak. After a while, he spit out a few words in disbelief. Shuyi, why did you talk to him? What's the matter? We are in love with each other, and you need to approve it. After finishing speaking, Shuyi didn't bother to talk to him at all, and just walked away. Yu Xingzhou's words fell like a heavy hammer. Shuyi, are you taking revenge on me? Shuy's footsteps stopped, and he was stunned for a moment, before slowly turning his head, with a sneer at the corner of his mouth. Yu Xingzhou, you think too highly of yourself. She paused, and then said, oh, but you really have to call me little aunt sooner or later. We will be relatives in the future. You'd better show respect to your elders, and don't gossip about you at every turn. After speaking, she pulled the suitcase and went straight to the opposite side. Yu Xingzhou watched helplessly as the driver got down and opened the door for her, and then moved the suitcase to the trunk. For a long time after that, Yu Xingzhou stood motionless at the gate of the community, watching the car drive away with the taillights flickering and the dust rising, and the phrase little aunt was still echoing in his mind. However, Shi Yan was not in the car. There's always something to do. It's past noon today. The driver said, I'll take you there. After being pestered by Yu Xingzhou for a while, Shuyi was already in a bad mood, but after knowing this, his mood became even more depressed. She thought Shi Yan went there with her. Well, I see, thank you. She responded, then leaned against the car window and said nothing. Fuching is not far away, a 3-hour drive, but it is the most convenient to drive directly. The driver was bored on the road, so he found a topic to chat with her, and found that she was not very natural, so he shut up and played soft music for her. Shuyi fell asleep and woke up and slept again. The journey went smoothly, and finally arrived at the hotel at 10 o'clock in the evening. After the driver accompanied her to check in, the hotel lobby manager personally brought Shuyi to the room. Since Shi Yan offered to bring Shuyi over, his secretary naturally booked the hotel, and Shuyi received a text message 2 days ago. Living in this suite alone was also expected by Shuyi. If he really lived in one room, then he wouldn't be Shi Yan. It's just that she was a little curious about where Shi Yan was. Shuyi, I'm at the hotel. 2 minutes later. Shuyi, where are you? These 2 messages were like sinking into the sea, and there has been no response. After Shuyi sat in the hotel for half an hour, he finally felt restless. In fact, when she stood alone in the strange city of Fuching, she felt a little lonely. Shi Yan obviously wanted to bring her here, but left her alone in the hotel. Besides, Shuyi rubbed his stomach. She didn't even have to eat dinner. At this moment, in the smoky private room, after drinking for 3 rounds, there are still waiters who keep changing the dishes and adding new wine. In the past 2 days, people in the industry from all over the world gathered in Fuching, so it was inevitable that some people would jump out to socialize. During the banquet, toasts were mixed, cups were pushed and changed, topics continued, olive branches were exchanged everywhere, and everyone was overwhelmed. All the people here are heavyweights, more or less have interests, no one will be distracted at this time. It wasn't until after 10 o'clock, when someone went out to use the bathroom during the dinner, that Shi Yan took the time to ask Chen Xing and Shuyi if they were there. Chen Xing nodded towards him. Raising his eyes, Shi Yan responded to the words of a partner on the opposite side, and at the same time glanced at the phone. In the past hour, Shuyi sent him several messages intermittently. Shuyi, alas, some people are feasting, while others are starving. Shuyi, I have no problem, I can do it. At this moment, the waiter next to him added wine to the glass in front of him. Shi Yan quickly typed 2 words, busy. Then, put down the phone. Sorry. Shi Yan stood up suddenly, his voice interrupted the conversation of the person opposite. I have something to do, excuse me first. After speaking, he raised his glass and drank the newly added wine, then turned and walked out of the box. There were few people in the corridor, and Shi Yan was talking to Chen Xing with his head tilted, when he suddenly ran into the person who had gone to the bathroom earlier. This person has a good relationship with Shi Yan in private, and his speech is much more casual. It's just that he was a little drunk at this time, and his footsteps were unsteady. Seeing that Shi Yan had left the table, he asked, "Have you left?" Shi Yan said yes, there is something. The man asked again, "What's the matter?" Shi Yan glanced at the elevator, with a calm expression, "Hey cat." "What?" The man thought he was drinking too much and heard it wrong. "You brought a cat with you on a business trip. So clingy." Shi Yan didn't want to entangle with him again, so he walked forward, but he didn't forget to answer his words. "Well, it's a bit fierce. I'm going to scratch people when I'm hungry." As the Spring Festival approaches, even though it is late at night, the streets of Fucheng are still full of trees and stars, and many people are reluctant to go home early despite the cold wind. Chen Xing knew that Shi Yan drank a lot of alcohol today, so he deliberately reminded the driver to drive slowly. "Need not." Shi Yan sat in the back row, looked down at his phone, and said casually, "Normal speed is fine." After speaking, he dialed Jing Shuyi's phone number. "What are you doing?" There was some noise on the other end of the phone, and Jing Shuyi's impatient voice came. "I'm having a good time." Shi Yan glanced at the phone screen and asked again, "What did you say?" "I said, I'm having a good time." Immediately, Jing Shuyi hung up the phone. Roadside barbecue restaurant, the road is placed at the door, cumin is sprinkled, and the fire is roasted. The aroma stimulates the most primitive taste buds, and it is really carefree. But Jing Shuyi never thought that he would stay outdoors for so long. Wearing a pencil skirt and exposing his calves to the wind would not be so happy. "Add more peppers." Jing Shuyi stretched out his hand, pointing at the fire while warming up. Don't want green onions." She lasted until almost 11 o'clock, but she didn't wait for Shi Yan's response, and she was so hungry that she realized why she was waiting for Shi Yan like an abandoned woman. So one turned over, put on a coat and came out to look for food. Perhaps she was lucky, and she smelled a tangy fragrance within a few steps of walking out of the hotel. "After looking for the scent, I found a barbecue stall with a very good business." Hearing the sound of the stove and the commotion around, Jing Shuyi's index finger moved so much that he couldn't walk anymore. It's just that when she was waiting for the barbecue here, the men at the table drinking and fisting looked at her several times. In the middle of the night, when the drunkenness was on the rise, as soon as a few people shook it, someone really got on the edge. Jing Shuyi was standing there, when a man in unlined clothes stepped forward and patted her on the shoulder. "Is there something wrong?" Jing Shuyi looked back at him. The man has a fleshy face, and there are scary-looking tattoos on his hands. When he smiles, his flesh is so crowded that his eyes can't see it. "Is the beauty alone?" Jing Shuyi ignored him and leaned to the side. "Let's go together." The man tugged at her sleeve. "It's cold, let's have a warm drink together." "No thanks." Jing Shuyi patted his hand away, and continued to lean to the side. But he didn't want that when they were talking. The other two men at that table also walked over, blocking Jing Shuyi's retreat. The whole body is full of the smell of alcohol that can't even cover the choking smell of smoke. After being smoked by the fire, it is inexplicably disgusting. "Is the beauty out to play alone?" "To save face for my brother, let's eat supper together and call a friend." "That's right, it's still early, let's eat and sing together." These people were probably ruffians. The owner of the barbecue shop took a look and wanted to persuade him, but he was afraid that there would be trouble in the evening, so he finally forgot it, so he had to pack Jing Shuyi's barbecue quickly. "Girl, your things are ready." Jing Shuyi didn't bother to pay attention to this group of people, took the takeaway box and left, but surrounded by groups. "Don't go, we said we'll make friends together, sit down first." Someone went straight to grab something in her hand. Jing Shuyi turned sideways and got angry. "You, go away." Halfway through Jing Shuyi's words, he suddenly froze. That voice just now. When she turned her head, Shi Yan was standing half a meter away from the shop. The light flickered with the unstable electric frequency, shining on Shi Yan's eyes, sometimes coldly, sometimes dimly. Like an invisible pressure, the people around Jing Shuyi naturally retreated. Jing Shuyi was still there in a daze. Shi Yan glanced down at the takeout box she was holding tightly, frowned indescribably, and pulled her away. After walking a few steps, those men finally realized. "Who the hell are you?" Shi Yan turned his head and glanced over. The person who made the sound automatically shut his mouth, and even took 2 steps back in fear. No need to speak, the sense of oppression from different classes catalyzed the spontaneous sense of fear. all the way without words. Shuyi was held tightly by Shi Yan. He has long legs and big strides, and he doesn't seem to care whether Shuyi can keep up, just striding towards the hotel. Shuyi staggered all the way and became angry. Called her to Fuching, but left her alone, didn't even show her face, sent a message and waited for a long time, only to reply busy. Suddenly appeared at this moment, dragged her away with a dead face, and didn't say a word. Shuyi became more and more angry. Until entering the elevator, Shuyi broke away from Shi Yan's hand, rubbed his wrist, and said dissatisfiedly, "What are you doing?" Shi Yan looked down at her, his tone was colder than the wind outside. "What are you doing alone at night?" "I'm going out to find something to eat." Shuyi shook the barbecue box in front of him. "Is this alright?" Shi Yan, "Need to dress like this, to find something to eat." Shuyi looked down at her clothes, except for the short skirt, everything looked good. "What do I wear? Doesn't it look good? You don't even care about that." She got angry, and the sound was like a small machine gun, which was heard in her ears and scratched like a cat's paw. "It's pretty." Shi Yan looked at Shuyi with a cold face, but hooked the corners of his lips, and his voice suddenly became hoarse. "Don't you know how attractive I am? Who will I cause trouble for if I go out like this at night?" Shuyi didn't answer, but looked up at Shi Yan. After a moment of silence, there was a sly smile in her eyes. "Are you praising me or scolding me?" she asked with a smile. "Then, did I recruit you?" Shi Yan pursed his lips and stared at her for a long time. It was so long that Shuyi smelled the faint smell of alcohol on his body. Strangely, the same smell of alcohol. At this moment, Shuyi didn't find it unpleasant. I don't know if it's because of the alcohol, but Shuyi felt that Shi Yan's eyes hidden behind the lenses had a sudden light flickering. Like a turbulent undercurrent in a calm sea. The elevator door closed slowly, as if to isolate the world except the two of them. Something indescribable was surging in this elevator. Shuyi's heartbeat suddenly became heavy. She stretched out her index finger and carefully poked Shi Yan's chest. "You can answer after you think about it." Suddenly, the index finger was held down by a warm hand, and immediately after, the entire palm was pressed against his chest by Shi Yan. Shi Yan's gaze slowly wandered over Shuyi's face, sweeping over the position just below the tip of her nose. Because the cramped space was airtight, it seemed that the distance between the two was even more minimal. In Shuyi's eyes, Shi Yan's face was getting closer and closer until his alcohol-smelling breath touched her lips. "Don't you know if you feel it?" After speaking, he tilted his head slightly, so that the distance between their lips disappeared. The air in the elevator seemed to be exhausted at this moment. "It's so thin it's hypoxic." Even if he just tasted it, he sucked her lips. Like teasing, without attacking the city, the wet touch outlined between the lips and teeth, and it was fleeting. He looked up, his eyes were black as abysses. Then, he pressed Shuyi's hand and asked in a low voice, "What do you think?" The consciousness has not returned, and it can only grasp the most superficial feelings. Shuyi didn't feel his heart beating wildly. "I just felt that my heart was about to jump out of my throat."
Welcome to Storyverse. If you have any novels you'd like to see or stories you'd like to share, feel free to leave us a comment or send us a private message. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button to join our community of avid readers and romance enthusiasts.
Chapter 35. The closed space squeezes the emotions so airtight that it is difficult to find a suitable outlet. Even, Shuyi didn't know how to answer Shi Yan. Shi Yan didn't speak, just looked at Shuyi like this. Obviously, he was the one who took action, but it was also he who insisted on waiting for an answer. Her silence became more and more difficult to maintain under Shi Yan's gaze. Although it was absolutely quiet, and even the sound of breathing was removed, the heartbeat in Shuyi's ears was amplified little by little, and the sound of bang 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 became louder every time. There seems to be jumping too fast to supply blood, and even oxygen is not enough, and the whole person begins to lose weight. Shuyi's throat tickled. "I want to reach out and hold my chest to stop it from beating, so as to give her a rational mind to answer Shi Yan's question, but everything was out of her control. She even began to wonder deliriously whether Shirban could hear her deafening heartbeat. In the endless silence staring at each other, the elevator suddenly rang. Shuyi didn't hear it, and didn't notice that the sense of weightlessness had disappeared. When the elevator door opened, two blonde foreigners stood outside. Seeing this scene, they froze for a moment, and then said, "Hello. Excuse me." Suddenly regaining consciousness, Shuyi caught a glimpse of the person coming from the corner of his eye. immediately withdrew his hand, and walked out immediately. There was still the residual warmth of the banquet in the hands, and there was a burning sensation hanging on the skirt, like a warm fire, spreading to the whole body little by little. Shi Yan followed behind her, walking unhurriedly. The woman in front walked quickly, with her head bowed, without saying a word. A few seconds later, Shi Yan stood still, and even folded his arms, to see what she would do. Shuyi, don't you know where your room is? You can even go in the wrong direction. Sure enough, Shuyi paused, then turned around and walked towards him. He still kept his head buried like that, and looking at that posture, it seemed that the person in front of him didn't exist. She remained the same until she almost passed by. Shi Yan calmly watched her pass him without eyes, and finally stretched out his hand impatiently to hold her. What the hell are you doing? One of them faced north and the other faced south, standing shoulder to shoulder. I'm thinking about something. Shuyi looked at the wide-open window at the end of the corridor in front of him, and said expressionlessly, Shi Yan, huh? Shuyi rolled his eyes, and then slowly retreated to Shi Yan. I was wondering, did you just kiss me? Time banquet. He raised his eyebrows. Shuyi, I'm not dreaming, am I? It's too unreal. Time banquet. Shuyi stepped on his feet. Come again. A gust of draft wind blows towards us. It is very cool, and it also has the effect of temporarily sobering up. Really, this woman who is so natural and also a poet cannot use normal logic to explore what she is thinking. Shu objected that he didn't speak, and began to intensify, grabbing his sleeve and shaking it. I didn't feel it just now. Come again. There is a chance to make up the exam. I'm applying for a makeup exam. After a while, Shi Yan grabs her sleeve, pulls it away, and then presses her shoulder, forcing her to turn left. Go back to sleep. She was pushed to the door, and he directly took out the room card from her coat bag, swiped the card to open the door. A series of actions were done in one go, and Shuyi didn't even have a chance to struggle. Not at all. When Shi Yan was about to close the door from the outside, Shuyi grabbed the door, tilted his head, and looked up pitifully. Are you really not going to come again? I really didn't feel anything. Shi Yan showed no expression, and opened her fingers one by one, and then closed the door without hesitation. Click, crisp lock. Inside and outside the door, the atmosphere suddenly changed. Shuyi exhausted all his strength, and the expression on his face disappeared. He had to lean his back against the door to support himself, and stared blankly at the opposite wall. Outside the door, Shi Yan stared at the door for a long time before leaving. That night, Shuyi soaked in the hotel bathtub for a long time, trying to dilute all the panic in his heart. Don't panic. If you panic at this time, everything will be derailed. Obviously she should be the one who leads all this. How does it feel that she is being passive? It wasn't until the water became cold that Shuyi got up slowly, and walked out wearing a bath towel, leaving water stains all over the floor. On the morning of the first day of the Cruncher Forum, there were two meetings, namely Financial Risk Contagion from the stock market from 9 to 10 o'clock and New Vision for Industrial Cooperation from 10:30 to 11:30. In the morning, Shuyi's alarm clock and the hotel's wake-up call rang at the same time. She sat up on the bed, her head ached, and she went to the bathroom to take a look at her face. Sure enough, as she expected, the dark circles under her eyes were as heavy as a panda. Fortunately, she brought a full set of cosmetics on this trip. It's just that she came out a few minutes later than the agreed time. Shi Yan stood at the door of her room, glanced at her watch, and knocked on the door helplessly. This helplessness was not because Shuyi was late for a while, but because he had a faint feeling that if he continued with this posture, maybe Shuyi would come up with some new tricks in the next 2 days. Shuyi has no other skills. In terms of fancy writing, it is definitely not something that ordinary people can resist. The people inside didn't respond, so Shi Yan had no choice but to call her. But as soon as he dialed, the door opened. The person in front of him was wearing a white shirt, a beige pencil skirt, and was holding a coat in his hand. His hair was tied behind his ears, and he was meticulously groomed. Appropriate makeup and a natural look. Thinking of her asking for a kiss last night, Shi Yan was still not used to it. It even felt like she was holding back some big moves again. However, until the two of them lost their car, Shuyi also sat peacefully, sitting on the side in a dignified manner, like a textbook female anchor. It is said to be normal, but there are abnormalities everywhere. Have you had breakfast yet? Shi Yan asked. Shuyi nodded. I have eaten, how about you? Shi Yan glanced at her. Yes. She smiled and continued to look straight ahead. Then quietly do psychological construction for yourself. Well, just hold on like this, I am the leader. The car drove steadily towards the venue. A few minutes later, Shuyi's phone vibrated, and someone was chatting with her in the group. This group is called Jiangqing Financial Reporters Circle. It's not a work group, but a private group created by some colleagues. The purpose is to promote communication and mutual assistance in the circle. There are magazine reporters like Shuyi, as well as TV reporters and new media reporters. Jiangqing Finance Channel Shihang at Shuyi, are you in Fuqing? Did I just see you? Right in front of the Oakley Hotel, is that you in the camel coat? Jiangqing Finance Channel Shihang, are you here to participate in this conference? Shuyi glanced at it and didn't intend to return, so he pretended he didn't see it. Anyway, the news was soon picked up by the group, but Kong Nand was also in this group. After she saw it, she immediately sent a private message to Shuyi. Shuyi took a peek at Shi Yan, seeing that his attention was not on her side, so he put the phone to his ear and pressed the play button. In the next second, Kong Nan's recognizable voice suddenly came out of the car's audio system. Why did you go to Fuqing? Attend the meeting. Didn't you say you were with your father? Shuyi. This sentence came out word by word, and it was extremely clear in the quiet car. Shuyi's phone froze by his ear. At that moment, she even suspected that she had heard wrong. How? Possibly, in the car, and released in public. But Shi Yan's reaction dispelled her luck. He tilted his head and narrowed his eyes. With Daddy. Shuyi was silent. The driver in the front row coughed, and she remembered that when she came last night, she thought the music played by the driver was not good, so she used her mobile phone to connect to Bluetooth. So as soon as she got in the car, the Bluetooth was automatically connected. Shuyi. Shi Yan raised his hand and leaned on the armchair behind her. It's shameful to go out with me. Shuyi suppressed herself not to panic. No. Oh, so. Shi Yan seemed to understand, and nodded, so you have this kind of interest. Shuyi turned his head, what's the fun? Shi Yan looked straight ahead and spit out a few words lightly. So you like to be called Dad. He also nodded, as if to accept this interest. Shuyi. Along the way since then, Shuyi has to be safe if he doesn't want to. Otherwise, she suspects that Shi Yan might really hold her back and call her dad. The benefits of attending the Cruncher Forum with Shi Yan are obvious. As a strategic partner who pays hundreds of thousands of euros a year, he gets more preferential treatment than ordinary members who pay tens of thousands of euros a year. Sitting in the first row, the host and the four guests were chatting with great fervor and eloquence, one topic after another, causing applause from the audience from time to time. It was only the first game, and the atmosphere was already high. Shuyi beside her was very quiet, looking intently at the people on the stage, thoughtful from time to time. Even Shi Yan looked at her several times without realizing it. Shi Yan didn't know if he felt a little strange at the moment, or he was not used to it. After the incident last night, he felt that it was normal for Shuyi to behave exaggeratedly after this. But nothing like this. What is she thinking day by day? Until the end of the first meeting, the people around me finally started to move. This kind of subtle movement did not attract the attention of others, but in Shi Yan's peripheral vision, all her changes could be seen clearly. Straighten your skirt for a while, and tuck your clothes for a while. For a while, the position of the crossed legs was exchanged, and for a while, he glanced at him again. His fingers were still digging lightly on the armrest, as if he wanted to say something, but he kept holding back. Shi Yan suddenly held her hand, pressed it against the armrest, and said in a low voice, "What do you want to do?" Shuyi struggled a little, but without pulling his hand back, he faltered and said, "After this scene is over, I want to go back to the hotel." The two whispered, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Shi Yan took a deep look at her. It started again. Sure enough, not so peaceful. But she didn't say anything. Her cheeks turned a little red again, so Shi Yan had no choice but to let her go. "Talk to me when you get back." Shuyi nodded. After the meeting ended, she immediately left quietly. Fortunately, the venue was not far from the hotel. Within 20 minutes, she returned to her room and called the front desk to ask for something. Hurriedly going to the bathroom to change her underwear and tampons, the moment Shuyi collapsed onto the bed, the world was spinning, and the cramping pain in her lower abdomen was like an erupting volcano, spreading all over her body. She kicked off her shoes, hugged the pillow tightly, and slowly curled up to a corner of the bed. At 11:30, the second meeting ended on time. Shi Yan just got up. Before he walked out of the venue, he was stopped by the host of this session. This is the host of a certain financial TV station. He has met with Shi Yan several times, and he is going to invite him to have lunch at this moment. When the banquet was over, the host looked around him and asked, "Is the lady who came with you here?" In fact, when he was on stage just now, he saw Shi Yan and Shuyi whispering and acting intimately, probably because of that kind of relationship. But then I thought, what if not? Wouldn't that be embarrassing? I feel a little uncomfortable. I have already returned to the hotel. She is very delicate, so she should not be able to come. Seeing Shi Yan's tone and demeanor when he said this, the host understood, nodded and said, "Then wait for the next opportunity. I think she is very interested in today's topic." Shi Yan let out a casual, Afterwards, he walked out with Chen Xing and looked at the phone, but there was no movement from Shuyi's side. He made a phone call, but no one answered. "Go ask the hotel." Shi Yan told Chen Xing, "What's the matter with her?" There was no need for Shi Yan to specifically say who this she was. Chen Xing took care of everything properly. A few minutes later, Chen Xing said, "I'm back at the hotel. I asked the front desk for a box of painkillers." Painkiller. Shi Yan glanced at his watch and said, "You can replace me at the noon dinner." Chen Xing nodded, but I was speechless in my heart. Why is it him again? He actually wanted to go back to the hotel to rest. When Shi Yan stood at the door of Shuyi's room, he was about to raise his hand to knock on the door, but paused. The distance from the venue to the hotel was too short, so close that he didn't realize it until now. Why didn't he say anything? After being frozen for a moment, Shi Yan lowered his hand and took out his phone instead. The bell rang for a long time until it automatically hung up. Shi Yan raised his hand again and rang the doorbell. Like a bell, the doorbell was rang 3 times and no one answered. Shi Yan frowned, turned and walked towards the elevator. The midday sun scattered sparsely through the curtains onto the bed, revealing mottled shadows on the pure white sheets. Shuyi broke out in a cold sweat, which soaked her clothes and stuck to her body, making her very uncomfortable, so that when she woke up in a daze, she was in a bad mood. At the same time, there was a ringing sound in her ear. She was thinking. She gave an irritated tisk, pushed the pillow away, and reached out to touch the phone. He didn't touch the phone, but felt a warm spot. Shuyi slowly opened her eyes and turned her head to the side. Shi Yan's face was beside her bed, and her hand was touching his wrist. How did you come in?" Shi Yan looked down at her fingers, then took her hand and stuffed it under the quilt. "If I don't come back, are you going to fend for yourself?" Perhaps it was because of taking the medicine that he was dizzy. Shuyi was in a daze for a long time before he realized the situation. Although what he said was not pleasant, he seemed to know that she was ill and came back to see her. Shuyi didn't speak. There was no trace of blood on his pale face, and even his eyes were foggy. He just stared at him like that, but he lost his usual anger. Shi Yan's heart was inexplicably twisted, as if he was sighing. He asked deeply, "What's wrong?" People are always particularly vulnerable when they are sick, and this principle has never changed. No one was there when she clutched at the pillow in pain and hammered and gnawed. That kind of hypocrisy can easily be magnified infinitely, making people feel like they have been abandoned by the world. With his appearance at this moment, Shuyi couldn't help but want to grasp that sense of security. There are no extra thoughts for her to think about other things. Only, "I hurt." Shuyi covered the quilt and spoke angrily, only to realize why her voice had changed like this. It's actually not that painful. But she just put on the appearance of being terminally ill. "Where does it hurt?" Shi Yan asked. Shuyi said hoarsely, "It hurts everywhere." "Time banquet." Shi Yan straightened up slowly, and the corners of his mouth slowly pursed. It seems that she has seen through her acting skills. Shuyi felt a little embarrassed and quickly said, "Actually, it doesn't hurt that much, just coax me a few words." Shi Yan lowered his eyes and looked her around. "How to coax?" "Just say." Shuyi thought for a moment. "Just say why you saw a fairy before you went to heaven." Shi Yan's expression was indescribable. Afterwards, he walked to the bed, took off his suit jacket, and sat on the sofa with a blank expression. When he looked up again, his tone became very helpless. "Sleep, I'm right here." "Fairy, the author has something to say." "Shi Yan, why don't you come and see Qiao Yao? She is the runaway princess of Disney."
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to our channel for more captivating illustrated romance audiobooks. Don't miss out on our latest releases and be part of our growing community. Hit that subscribe button and embark on an enchanting journey with us.